Hey guys, this webinar is for you if you're a nurse or midwife who is feeling stressed, burned out, anxious, not enjoying your time off work, perhaps you're fearful, doubting yourself and not really taking opportunities that you know you should be. Let's dive right into the webinar to learn some tools and techniques to help you feel calmer, more collected, more confident and get the most out of your career and life.
Okay guys, here it is, thriving under pressure as a nurse, how to overcome anxiety, beat self-doubt and feel empowered. Okay, so let's just, to begin with, acknowledge why you are here. You're watching this because you're a nurse or midwife who I expect is feeling burned out, stressed, anxious, maybe low in mood. Maybe there's physical symptoms going on, you're feeling sick, maybe you've got chronic pain, asthma, it could be anything really. Maybe you've lost your focus and attention. And this is all impacting your working life and probably your relationships and your personal life as well. It's so common within the nursing and midwifery workforce. You guys are under immense service pressures. It's not surprising you feel burned out and stressed and anxious. And in my experience, many of you guys have never really been given much, if any, kind of preparation or support to cope with or deal with some of the things that you have to do on a day-to-day basis. Now, I am all for making organizational changes to increase the support you're given, to eradicate, eliminate problems like violence, harassment, bullying at work. These are the things that we definitely want to focus on first. But it's also really helpful as individuals to have some tools and techniques that you can use to overcome anxiety and to be more confident about yourself. And that's what I'm going to be teaching you within this webinar. So a quick introduction to me. You have probably already seen me before. You have signed up to my email list, you've come across me on social media. Hopefully you already like some of the content that I've put out there, but look, just as a quick introduction, my name's Nathan. I'm a clinical psychologist who deeply cares about supporting nurses and midwives. I've had a lot of practical experience of working with you guys in my professional life, witnessing how little support nurses got in brain injury settings, which is where I originally worked when I qualified. But in my personal life, I've been on the receiving end of some incredible compassionate care from both nurses and midwives, and I really care about giving you guys some tools, some things that are not only going to help you just bear with the anxiety and stress and just kind of get on with things, but really to flourish and to get to where you want to be in your career, but also your personal life as well. So just to set the scene a bit of what I'm going to be sharing with you in this webinar, the kind of approach, the concept, if you like, this has actually come from my own personal experience. You know, I'm not perfect. I've been through my own challenges as well, mental ill health in the past and a period of burnout. And what happened for me several years ago was things got really bad. Basically, my wife came to me and said, "You're just so stressed and anxious and it's impacting our relationship. And I'm worried how this is all going to affect our family life if we have children." And in that moment, it really made me do some soul searching and work out what was going on for me. And I realized that as well as all of the crazy service pressures that were creating stress for me and the high workload and the high level of responsibility, really what was happening was the way I was talking to myself was creating a lot of stress and anxiety. So after paying a bit of attention to what was going through my head, I realized I was being very self-critical, putting really enormous amounts of pressure on myself and not forgiving myself for little mistakes, thinking I had to be perfect all the time, doubting myself, and this was creating lots of stress and anxiety. And I went on a journey of learning some tools and ways to approach how I was responding to stress and emotions and change my internal narrative. And that transformed things for me. I actually got out of the job that I was in and started doing things that were much more fulfilling. And in the end, I ended up doing this. I'm here doing this webinar because of me implementing the kinds of things I'm going to share with you in this webinar. So, a real success story for me, but I also help nurses and midwives like you with this stuff on a day-to-day basis. So what I'm going to be teaching you is a way to feel more confident and more empowered, and as we go through this webinar, you will start to feel that. You'll start to feel a sense of possibility, hope in yourself with this approach. And I hope that you're going to leave feeling a bit like these characters here, empowered like a superhero. So let's just talk about stress in nursing to begin with. You're here because you're stressed and burned out and anxious, I imagine. And you have probably come to the realization, like many, that it's impossible to eliminate all stress. That's not just in your nursing career, but also in day-to-day life in general. We often do a lot to try and get rid of stress, to avoid stress, and of course, stress can be bad for us sometimes, which we're going to explore a little bit more about shortly. But the fact is that stressful experiences are kind of built in to the profession that you have chosen. When you're working with disability and dying and severe illness, there's going to be stress there. When you're working closely with other human beings in a high-pressured environment, there is always going to be some degree of stress at some time. It doesn't matter whether you work clinically or in academia, any setting is going to create some stress. Equally, in your personal life, parenting, having relationships with family members and friends, these things are always going to create stress at some point. What I'm going to be sharing with you then today is not how do we get rid of all the stress in our life, because that's just impossible and an unrealistic target. But I'm going to be showing you what is really kind of like a little secret that we can actually start implementing to not just cope better with stress and anxiety, but actually rise to challenges, overcome that, feel empowered and flourish in the face of stress and actually use it to your advantage. And this is the main concept that I want to cover within this webinar. It's something that you would have heard about, it's something that you already do, but you probably haven't paid that much attention to. And I'm going to go into detail as to what this is and why it is really important. Self-talk, your inner narrative, the way you are talking to yourself, the thoughts that go through your mind on a day-to-day basis. As human beings, we have tens of thousands of thoughts that go through our mind each day. Some of them are completely spontaneous and random things. Some of them are much more intentional and kind of guide our behavior in some way. What we know is that the way you are talking to yourself is going to be having a massive impact on how stressed and anxious you feel. I just came off a call with a nurse who was interested in working with me, who said he's experiencing extreme anxiety and there's some other mental ill health, but he's never really aware of what thoughts go through his mind. And after some discussion, he realised that he was extremely self-critical in his mind, doubting himself, putting himself down, thinking of the worst case scenarios all the time. Within about 10 minutes, we identified various different types of thought and thinking pattern that he immediately realised were making him feel more anxious and stressed out. So let me ask you right now, as you're watching this, just pause for a moment and ask yourself this. What is your self-talk like right now? You're obviously at a point in your life where you're feeling stressed and burned out, otherwise you wouldn't be here. Unless you're here purely to learn some stuff to share with your team, which is fantastic if that's the case. But just ask yourself, how am I talking to myself? What kind of tone do I talk to myself with? Is it a harsh tone? Is it a supportive tone? What kinds of words or phrases characterize the way you talk to yourself in moments of stress and anxiety? Are you even aware that you have thoughts? Something I see often is that people just aren't aware of the fact that they have thoughts. And then how do you internally respond to stress and emotions? Now, this is a bit of an unusual question for some people. I'm asking you, when you feel stressed, or when you feel anxious, or when you feel guilty, or when you feel shameful, how do you talk to yourself about those emotions? Do you say to yourself, I'm feeling stressed, I'm feeling anxious right now? Does that ever go through your mind? Is it ever something you verbalize? My prediction is that probably not very often, if at all, with some people. And that's okay. And what I'm going to be talking to you about is why it's really helpful that we do this and how you can go about that moving forward and how that's going to be beneficial for you. So this is the reality. How you are responding to stress and your emotions will be impacting how you feel right now. And when I say respond, what I mean is internally, stress is being activated, created in your body by a situation that is happening outside. And there will be other emotions there as well. And the way you're responding to that, the kind of thoughts that are going through your mind, is going to dictate whether those emotions or that stress is amplified or whether it is reduced. Or in some situations, whether or not you get stressed out at all by the situation is going to be determined by the way you're talking to yourself. So, what do? You might be asking. Well, you change your relationship with stress and emotions by changing your self-talk. And we can use stress and our emotions to our advantage if we start to do this. And let me show you how. First of all, let's just take a quick step back, okay? So I want to ask you this. Are stress and anxiety the enemy? Are these things always bad? We often kind of treat them as if they are. You might have joined this webinar looking for ways just to get rid of stress, get rid of anxiety. It's really common within our culture to want to eliminate negative or yucky emotions. So are they the enemy? And I guess I'm asking you this question, right? Is stress always bad? I mean, I've actually already answered that a little bit earlier with what I said. It's a kind of rhetorical question because the answer is no. It depends. Have a think for yourself right now, actually. In your life, can you think of times where stress actually might be a good thing for you or have been beneficial? Can you think of how anxiety actually could be beneficial for you? Why it might be helpful? Part of the key to overcoming stress and feeling more confident in yourself is really exploring this further. In order to do that, what I want to do is give you an overview of what's happening in our body when we're feeling stressed out and where that kind of comes from. So the stress response is made up of different emotions. Sometimes, when you're feeling stressed, you're feeling anxious, maybe there's other stuff going on. There might be anger as well. That stress response that you experience now, today, is part of an ancient evolutionary mechanism we as humans developed over thousands, tens of thousands of years of natural selection and evolution, right? The hardware you are running in your brain and body right now when you get stressed and anxious is the same as it was many, many millennia ago. It really has not changed very much. That's what we know from neurobiology. And when it was first designed, if you like, as it first emerged, the stress response was designed to keep us safe from threats. Now you can imagine back in the day, tens of thousands of years ago, when we didn't live in nice apartments or townhouses, we were out on the African plains or wherever it was we originated, we were much more exposed to physical threats, like a bear or a tiger. And the stress response gets activated almost like a kind of car alarm, right? It's an alarm that goes off. Your brain is searching for threats all the time, kind of on a subconscious level. The stress response gets activated, and you've probably heard this term fight or flight before. There's a little bit more nuance to the fight or flight response, but for the purposes of this video, I'm not going to go into that right now. So when the stress response gets activated, your brain and body are basically saying, okay, there's a potential threat there to my safety, and I need to do something about it. I need to either run away from it, or I need to gear up to fight that threat, that predator, whatever it is, right? But in the modern day, things are a bit different, aren't they? Now look, I know that you may have been on the receiving end of physical violence from somebody, and of course that is still a physical threat, and that fight or flight response is super helpful in those kind of situations. So this is part of what I want to share with you, is that actually the stress response was helpful, and it still is helpful at times. But in your role and in your personal life, that threat response is being activated many, many times for lots of different things that your brain is interpreting as a quote-unquote threat. It could be a high-stakes clinical situation like this. It could also be public speaking, right? As a social species, human beings interpret certain threats as social threats, right? So when you stand up to give a presentation in front of a group of people, there is a chance, your brain tells you, that they're going to judge you negatively and you're going to be ostracized from your group. So your brain is looking out for potential rejection from your peers, which in the past would have been very detrimental to us because you may have been kicked out of your tribe and then you could die, right? So when you're going to give a talk at a nursing conference or in front of your team, your brain is interpreting that as a threat, and that threat response is being activated. You may be on the receiving end of some kind of violent behavior or abusive behavior from a service user, patient, client, and that is activating the threat response. It could just be an argument with a member of the public or conflict with a team member. We've all had this. All of these things could be activating that threat response, which, as I said, that might be helpful for you in the moment. But then, of course, what happens is, as human beings, we have this wonderful ability to think about things in our mind and replay situations and think about what's going to happen in the future. The problem is, when you're lying in bed at night, every time you rehash that argument with your line manager, or you think about the public speaking that's going to happen in 2 weeks' time, you are reactivating that threat response every single time. So what happens is, acute stress can become chronic stress through worrying about things. So this threat response, we can kind of characterize it in this way, right? When we are activating the threat response, generally what's going through our mind, the kind of self-talk, if you like, the thoughts that we're having are catastrophes, right? We're thinking about the worst case scenario with something, and then your brain is basically interpreting that as something is threatening about this. I need to activate the stress response to try and get me out of the situation or to gear me up to fight the potential threat. So worst case scenarios, and we're also often focusing on the negatives and what's wrong. That's also part of this evolutionary mechanism. In the past, it was helpful to focus on the threat and what's wrong, the negative aspects of the experience, because often that would help you avoid the negative things and get you into safety. In these times, we are often doubting, blaming, and judging ourselves, right? So that kind of self-talk also activates this threat response. And when all that's happening, when the threat response is being activated, things often seem insurmountable in your life. Think about where you're at right now. You might feel very overwhelmed. In your moments of anxiety or even panic, it might feel like, how am I going to get through this? It's impossible. And when that happens, we struggle to create options for ourselves. We don't think clearly, and it's difficult to problem solve. So this threat response is quite pernicious and can be quite bad for us in many, many ways, even though, originally it was designed to help us. And as I mentioned, Stress is bad when it becomes chronic. In the short term, a little bit of this stress response is not unhelpful for us. It can actually be really helpful. But over time, the threat response keeps getting activated, and then it just becomes this blur. If you're feeling burned out, you're not even going to notice necessarily the kind of individual times where that threat response is being activated. It probably just feels like it's there all the time, and maybe you're just feeling exhausted, and that's what chronic stress is. And that's what leads to burnout. But the good news is this: we can change the body's response to stress with our own thinking, as I mentioned near the beginning, with our self-talk. And I'm going to introduce to you one way in which we can do this. This is something that I'm really excited about. I love helping people do. It's based on solid scientific evidence, and it's just really cool. So what we know from the research literature on stress is that threat response, the stress response in the body and mind, is more nuanced than it just being about threat. There is actually a continuum of what is called the threat challenge continuum. So let me just illustrate what the challenge response is by asking you to do a little bit of reflection. Think about a recent time where, despite the situation being objectively stressful, there were high demands being placed on you, there was a lot going on, maybe it was a work situation, clinical situation, which something unexpected might have been happening, you were being asked to step up, you had to do something suddenly, quickly, to support someone or a team member, or it could be going on in your personal life. Despite the situation being kind of stressful, you actually felt like you rose to that challenge. You felt kind of pumped and motivated. You were perhaps thinking quite clearly, even though feeling this stuff in your body, this kind of energy. And actually you performed pretty well. Maybe you performed really well. Maybe there was some great teamwork, you communicated effectively, you were able to problem solve. What's happening here is you are activating the challenge response. So it's still a stress response, but it's the kind of challenge end of that stress response. This is what professional athletes, professional musicians, fighter pilots, people like that are utilizing consciously to help them to perform at a high level in high stakes, high stress environments. And how do they do that? By changing the way they think. By changing the way they are responding to the situation, to the anxiety, to the stress which is showing up for them. And I'm going to talk to you a bit more specifically about how you do that in a moment. But first of all, I just want to tell you about some of the key physiological and cognitive differences between these two responses. So when you are able to activate that challenge response, it's less detrimental to you from a physical perspective and beneficial in many ways. So that threat response, we said how it can be beneficial in the short term. What happens when the stress response or the threat response is being activated is there are changes in your heart rate and blood pressure and breathing, but these are all geared to protect you in the short term. Your blood gets diverted away from your stomach, your immune functioning gets put on hold, basically, because in the short term, you don't need your immune functioning to run away from a bear. What you do need is blood pumping to your primary muscle groups, your legs, your arms, so you can run away or fight that bear. And also, when you're in those moments, you don't really need to be accessing all of your cognitive resources, because self-preservation, self-protection is the most important thing. So that's why when you experience the threat response, you can actually feel quite overwhelmed by the demands of a situation, because your thinking is focused just on that one particular thing, and it's quite narrow. So over time, when this keeps being activated, we become immunosuppressed. That's why you get sick when you've got chronic stress. And that's why you're unable to think your way out of situations. You're feeling foggy and you feel like you don't have many options available to you. On the other hand, when you're activating the challenge response, things are different. So what we know from research is that cardiac output and efficiency is increased during that challenge response. Your breathing rate is not fast and kind of hyperventilating as it is with the threat response. It's actually slower, more gradual. And of course, what happens then is blood oxygenation improves throughout your body and importantly to your brain. And when that happens, when your frontal lobes are given more of that blood glucose and oxygen, this is the part of your brain which is able to think more clearly, rationally. That's why when you're activating the challenge response, not only are you kind of physiologically more adapted, optimized, but you can think better, right? So it's going to help you to problem solve, it's going to help you to perform at a higher level in difficult situations. So that's why it's helpful for us to learn how to do this. So what I'm going to share with you is a way in which you can start to approach this. And I want you to think about anxious stress that you might be experiencing in relation to one or several areas of your working life or your personal life, right? So we all get anxious about things. We can all feel quite stressed and sometimes worry, like we're anticipating something that's coming up. It could be a difficult conversation. It could be public speaking. Could be anything. Often what happens in those moments is we're activating that threat response and we're not even aware of our self-talk. We're not aware of what's going through our mind. We become quite reactive and that kind of exacerbates the yucky feelings that we have. What we do to create this challenge mindset, if you like, to activate the challenge response, is we start consciously talking to ourselves differently. So what we start to do is we start to acknowledge, well, hang on a second, I'm experiencing this stress or this anxiety, and actually this thing was originally built to help me in some way. So can I actually talk to myself about that? Telling yourself, okay, well, I'm feeling anxious ahead of this, let's say, job interview. Well, perhaps this feeling means my body is preparing me for something important. Rather than being focused on the potential negative outcomes, the worst case scenarios, what you're doing is you're shifting your self-talk to say to yourself, well, actually, maybe I can grow from this. Like maybe there is actually some good that could come out of this situation. And then with a much more motivational tone, you are saying to yourself, well, I can do this. I can do it. This is a challenge that I can overcome. And if it sounds simple, that's because it actually is quite simple, but just requires practice. And when we do that, what happens is we're better able to activate this challenge response. You're going to replace worry about something with excitement. Imagine what it would be like for you if you were to talk to yourself in this kind of way. If you were to truly start believing that some good could come from this thing that was stressful or anxiety provoking, that you could grow from that experience, then you're actually going to become excited, actually optimistic about things, because you know that whatever happens, some good could come from it. And then what happens is you start to feel better about yourself. And the more you activate that challenge response, the better you are at performing at whatever that thing is. It could be in a conversation, a presentation, anything really. And that becomes a virtuous cycle. You perform better, you perform at a higher level, and then you start to talk to yourself more kindly. Like, wow, okay, I did that. Maybe I'm not so terrible at this thing. Maybe I can actually get through this thing. So look, this is somebody that I worked with recently. This is Lynn, who went through my program, which I'm going to tell you a little bit about later. She was a nurse manager, a very experienced nurse in a very stressful job. And one of the things that created a lot of stress for her was public speaking. Speaking to her team each week, something that many nurse leaders have to do. She was feeling stressed about other things in her role, and she was also experiencing some stress within a relationship. But one of the things we worked on was creating this challenge mindset, helping her to talk to herself differently. And we did exactly what I've been talking to you about already. I guided Lynn to pay more attention to what she was feeling in her body and when, And then she started to talk to herself differently. We came up with some phrases that she was going to say to herself. She started to relate to that anxiety and stress differently, and ultimately overcame the kind of debilitating anxiety that would really drag her down and get her worrying about things days in advance. She was able to activate that challenge mindset. She said she felt much more empowered and confident to show up and be the kind of nurse she wanted to be in those meetings. And of course that created less anxiety, and she was just kinder to herself, right? Many nurses are self-doubting, very self-critical, and this was something that was really, really valuable to her. So you really can use this approach anywhere where you're experiencing stress or anxiety, because, as I mentioned earlier, what I tend to find is that in those moments, people's self-talk is either absent or they're just not aware, or certainly not in conscious control about what they're saying to themselves when they feel anxious or stressed. So it could be a training situation where someone's observing you, or you're delivering training. It could just be a mundane thing that you get into work and there is a problem with your equipment, or you just got tons of emails and that creates stress for you. It could be something like the example I've already shared with you around public speaking, team meetings, or interviews. People get really held back by the anxiety and stress that these cause. People often avoid those sorts of things, and that limits where people get to in their career. It could be in your personal life. I personally use this with my toddler all the time. When he is behaving in a certain way, and that creates some stress in myself, I start talking to myself in this way. You know, this is a challenge that I can overcome. This is going to be okay. I can do it. Or it could be some other conflict you have at work or in your personal life. So really, the basic overview of this is you're noticing your emotions. You're pausing. What am I feeling? Right? Okay, there's stress, there's anxiety. You're acknowledging that those things could be beneficial for you. And you are talking to yourself in this motivational, empowering way. This is a challenge I can overcome. And what happens in those moments is you can activate that challenge response and get all the benefits that I've already told you about. There you go. There's a summary of that once again. If you change the way you talk to yourself when you're feeling anxious and stressed, you're going to increase your self-motivation and also self-compassion. You're going to be kinder to yourself. So this is something we hear a lot when you're thinking about parenting. If you've got kids, you'll know this. People often say this to children when they're like being really reactive and crying and kind of whining about things or getting annoyed. Use your words. Use your words. And this piece of advice is helpful for us too, right? When you're in the middle of being stressed or being anxious, you're just being consumed by those emotions, those physiological responses. If you actually talk to yourself and tell yourself what you're feeling, like, I'm feeling stress, I'm feeling anxiety, in that moment you will get a little bit of distance from whatever it is you're feeling, and that is going to give you an opportunity to start talking to yourself in a more positive, empowering way. So look, self-talk really is a skill set. It's a bit like learning a new language. Talking to yourself in this self-compassionate or self-empowering way is something that requires practice. You know, we have to work out, okay, when am I talking to myself in a negative or disempowering way? What do I want to say to myself, ideally in those situations? Can I practice saying it to myself and then review how it went? And this is the kind of thing that I do in my coaching and my online programs with nurses and midwives. This is Grace, a registered nurse that I worked with recently, a real success story. Grace came to me. She was experiencing lots of self-doubt. She was burning out. She struggled to forgive herself for any tiny mistake she made, put a lot of pressure on herself, was feeling anxious days before she returned to work. And this is what we did, right, in our work together. She went through my online program, we had some live coaching sessions together, and I asked her questions like this, like, what is it you are saying to yourself in those difficult moments? Talk me through that. Let's write it down. And then what do you want to say to yourself in those moments? Okay, let's practice saying that then. And As you practice that, you develop this new skill of talking to yourself differently. You start to feel differently, and you will start to act differently. And that's what's going to make a change in your life. So here's a quick summary. The way we talk to ourselves will determine how we respond to stresses and challenges. And how can this benefit us? Well, in so many different ways, mainly because of how I explained. The way you talk to yourself will change your physiology, right? You'll experience more confidence as you start to talk to yourself in this way. You'll feel better about yourself. You'll start backing yourself. You'll start taking more courageous actions. And that's going to give you career success. You're going to start to go for job interviews. You're going to start to put yourself forward for opportunities that might have been anxiety provoking or created some fear. You're going to feel healthier, right? Because of the mechanisms by which altering our stress response improves your immune functioning and is likely to make you more active, right? You're going to have more energy. That's going to help improve your overall health, and you're going to enjoy life more. The more you're able to overcome that anxiety, that self-doubt, that stress, you're going to go out and spend time away from work doing the things that you want to do. And it's going to improve your relationships as well. Because when you're able to talk to yourself in this way, you're less reactive and snappy. You're going to be a better mum or dad. Or there's going to be less tension in that relationship with your mum or dad or in-laws, for example. Because you'll start to respond to stress, anxiety, anger, irritation with a sense of calmness and ease. So look, I'm sure this webinar would have been helpful for you. But you know what? Sometimes it's really helpful to get additional support with this stuff. If you are watching this, you've got this far, there's a good chance that you really are feeling quite burned out, anxious, stressed, and getting some additional support to work on what we've covered in this webinar could be helpful for you. And I've got something that I'm sure will be helpful for you. And I want to spend a couple of moments just talking to you about that right now. And after that, I'm going to give you an opportunity to book in a free call with me, a free discovery call where we'll talk more about my online program, your situation, what you're going through right now, and how that program can help you. And this is it. It's called the Empowered Nurse Toolkit. So this is a program that I put together. It took me a couple of years, really. I've distilled all of my tools that help with stress management, managing emotions, really just tools to help you live a better life and to feel more empowered and confident. The program is a bit of a hybrid. So there are online self-paced modules that you go through in your own time. You fit them around your busy working life and your busy family life potentially. And this program is then supplemented with some live check-ins with me. They can be phone calls or video calls depending on your preference. And we really do help you to change that internal narrative, that self-talk, to make you feel more confident, to start taking bold, courageous actions to get you where you want to be as a leader or in your career or even in your personal life, in your relationships. And you're going to feel healthier and happier as a result of that. So what I've covered with you in the webinar just now, I guess I've been planting some seeds for you around these ideas around self-talk. And this online course, this program with the coaching is going to help you by creating the conditions in which those seeds are going to grow and you're going to flourish. And we just talked to you about a few people who've been through this program. This is Lynn, who we saw earlier, right? Lynn was that nurse manager, a nurse leader. We helped her with building confidence around team meetings, but I also mentioned around her relationship with her teenage son. That was quite fractured and tense. And the tools within this program and my live coaching helped her to navigate that, helped her to be calmer, more compassionate within that relationship. It made her feel like she was being a better mum and she was able to be much more kind to herself after as a result. So think about what that might be like for you. Do you have relationships that are tense at the moment, not of the best quality perhaps? Maybe you're angry or irritable. What would it be like for you if you were able to improve the quality of those, or to finally build the courage to do things at work that you were scared of, like job interviews or public speaking or other opportunities you're missing? This is John, who came to me feeling burned out. He was signed off work sick, and he went through this program as he returned to work. And I'm actually going to show you a video of John and what John said about engaging in this program and getting that support from me. So let's just have a quick look at what John had to say.
Was it, I think I applied about a month ago or something, and someone happened at work. Obviously, I've been going through the course, and I just said, "Tell me, I'm just going to apply." So the course has been pivotal in some aspects for me pushing myself forward. It's given me that gusto to move forward and take control of the situation. I wasn't in control of the situation. I wasn't applying, and that's obviously you're just lying in that bed doing nothing. So the course has helped me make that decision to move forward, because it's actually given me tools to work with. Patient who's desperate to get out, she's going psychotic and that stuff, really bad. She comes up, I said I can't help her, so she totally lost it. Taking deep breathing, I'm going back into control. I got myself back into control from that. I apologetic to the patient I was working with, and then I just basically assisted the patient to do what she needed to do. So I was taking myself back into control, and that's happened a couple of times. I mean, the course has been brilliant, but I keep telling my colleagues about your course.
Yeah.
I tell them all. I've told the counsellor, I've told the OK Health. You know what I mean? Because the course, to me, the course is pivotal because there's not enough support for nurses.
So that's John. So have a think about your own situation. Are you getting angry, irritable, reactive, frustrated with colleagues, maybe even patients and other people in your life because you're stressed and you're feeling anxious? One of the main benefits that John received from working with me and doing this program was that he learned some really practical tools to feel more in control and calmer, like he shared there. John also learned to build confidence in himself. He was someone who was putting himself down a lot. And actually, after he finished the program, something really quite amazing happened. John actually had the courage to leave the job that he was previously in, because the program helped him to acknowledge how he truly felt about things. He'd been kind of trying to convince himself that everything was okay and he'd be able to get on with the role. But then eventually he actually had the courage and confidence to go and have an interview somewhere else and got the first job that he applied for. So maybe that's something that would be helpful for you. Not all of my work aims to help people get out of jobs, but sometimes that can be helpful for people. So Grace, let me just quickly talk to you about Grace and show you a video of her. We spoke about her earlier. As I mentioned, Grace, when she came to me before working with me, was very self-critical, putting herself down as well, just didn't really believe in herself, was really burned out and was really at risk of leaving the profession. She was feeling anxious on her days off work, and just things were really, really quite tough for her. And it was really wonderful working with her. Let me just show you this video of one of the main benefits Grace got from this program.
One of the biggest things that I've noticed is before we went through our work together, I would find that, especially the day before I would have to return to work, that I would have extreme anxiety about having to go back. I think, I still feel a little bit of that anxiety, but it doesn't kind of ruin my last day off before I have to go. I mean, now I can look at it and go, well, I have to go back to work tomorrow, and tomorrow will be, a different day, but I can still kind of make the most of the time that I have in my free time and not spend it criticizing myself or feeling anxious about having to return to the shift. And I feel like that has paid a lot of dividends in terms of really making the most of my time and energy to do the things that I want before I have to return to work.
So I really want you to ask yourself, How much have you been missing out on in your personal life because of feeling anxious and stressed because of your job? See what happened here for Grace. She said, yeah, okay, there was some anxiety remaining, but this had reduced significantly, and it was really enabling her to enjoy her time with her husband and her friends and go on trips and not be thinking about work all the time. So what would it mean to you to have that? So look guys, now is the time to get in touch with me if you're a nurse who's burned out, stressed and feeling anxious. You're fed up of feeling that way and ready to make a change. You want to stay in nursing and positively impact many more lives. You're willing to commit time and effort if it meant significantly improving your life. And with the right person and program, you'd be willing to invest money into yourself and your future as a nurse. I can help you move forward with things. You can get the results that you've seen here from these other people that I've showed you. And what I'm going to invite you to do, if you'd be interested in exploring that and working with me, is book a call. Book a call with me right now. Don't delay doing this. You've obviously watched this webinar because you're feeling a certain way. You don't have to go on feeling that way. Book a call. You can click on the link that should appear on your page. If you don't see that link for some reason, then you can just send me a message on Facebook or even email me. And that's going to take you through to an area where you can fill in a brief form that will help you understand a bit more about your situation. And then you can book in a mutually convenient time to have a call. And we're going to jump on a call together. I'm going to ask you a bit more about your situation, what's going on for you, what you've tried in the past, what has or hasn't worked. And I'm going to talk to you in more detail about the Empowered Nurse Toolkit, this online program, and talk to you about how it can get you results in your life and what that's going to look like. And then if you want to continue and go on that journey with me, we'll talk about that. We'll talk about how we can make that happen. So I'd really love to have a conversation with you. If you've watched this, you found this inspiring, motivating, empowering, and you think I can help. So book that call in right now. Have a great rest of your day. Thanks for being here and watching this webinar with me.